in 2017 that there was no evidence to sustain a corrupt finding against Kazal and Kelly. Yet this report stayed on Gladys's desk year after year, even though she told me publicly in many interviews that she'd fix the injustice they sustained. The same with the innocent new coal shareholders who lost everything. And even ICAC recommended for those shareholders compensation. Nothing has happened. With O'Farrell, Baird or Berejiklian, Gladys, in fact, would often preface an interview with me by saying, oh, you're not going to go on about ICAC again, are you? And here she is, in exactly the same position as the private businessman Mr Kazal and the public servant Andrew Kelly, labelled with the tattoo of corruption, as Sharif Kazal calls it, that cannot be removed. It was the Michael Baird government, in which Gladys was Treasurer, that passed the most scandalous piece of legislation, some say, in the history of New South Wales politics, the ICAC Validation Act. This followed the humiliating defeat of ICAC and, by inference, the government in the Cunneen affair. The Validation Act now means that if ICAC wrongly determines a corrupt finding against an individual, the ICAC Validation Act stops that individual from using their democratic right to have the decision challenged in a New South Wales court of law. I repeatedly urged Baird and Berejiklian to change this. You can forget Perrottet. He didn't even understand it, but he was in the government. Put in place this was by a Liberal government that included today's victim. Gladys now cannot use her democratic right to take this matter to court. This was set up after Margaret Cunneen proved in the High Court that ICAC had exceeded its powers when it argued that Margaret had acted corruptly. ICAC was stopped in its tracks by the High Court, who found that ICAC had operated outside its legislative powers. Ironically, it was ICAC that brought the action against Margaret Cunneen to the High Court, and they lost. Now Gladys, like Mr Kazal and Mr Kelly, can't have their day in court and challenge a corruption finding. So I don't know where we go from here. There's talk of an appeal. I don't know where that goes. See, no matter how weak or strong that finding might be, tragically, Gladys is now suffering as a citizen what she and her colleagues in government did to other honourable citizens, like Sharif Kazal and Andrew Kelly, who'll never recover from their unjust finding. They've been labelled corrupt because they could have done something wrong. Despite the case law in the New South Wales Supreme Court from 1992 involving Premier Greiner v ICAC, 1992. Premier Greiner also lost his job. And when he went to court, the Supreme Court found that you cannot be labelled corrupt on the could test. It argued there must first be evidence of wrongdoing that could be prosecuted, which was missing in the Greiner case and the Kazal-Kelly case. So there are ICAC, clearly aware of the 1992 Greiner case that saw Greiner's quote-unquote corruption overturned, yet ICAC was happy to label Kazal and Kelly corrupt. Now the same ICAC finds Gladys corrupt because they believe she had a suspicion that Maguire was corrupt and therefore should have reported Maguire to ICAC. By what mental gymnastics could ICAC determine what was in the mind of Gladys Berejiklian? And remember, ICAC says she's corrupt but doesn't recommend any charges be made against her.